Tom Reynolds had always dreamed of a simpler life. Not the kind where you're stuck in traffic or waiting in line at the grocery store, but the kind where you wake up to the sound of birds chirping and go to bed with the gentle hum of crickets outside your window. For years, he worked a 9-to-5 job in the city, saving every penny he could, hoping one day he'd escape the chaos. That dream came true when his late uncle left him a small cabin by the lake. It wasn't much, a modest wooden structure with creaky floors and a fireplace that smoked more than it heated, but to Tom, it was paradise. The cabin sat on the edge of a quiet neighborhood filled with vacation homes. Most people only visited on weekends or during holidays, leaving the area peaceful for the rest of the week. At least, that's what Tom thought when he first arrived. Little did he know, this little slice of heaven came with its own set of challenges. On his first weekend there, Tom spent hours fixing things around the cabin. He patched up the roof, cleaned out the gutters, and even hung a bird feeder outside the front door. Watching tiny sparrows flutter around gave him a sense of calm he hadn't felt in years. Life seemed perfect until she showed up. It happened on a bright Saturday morning. Tom was sitting on the porch, sipping coffee and enjoying the view of the lake shimmering under the sun. The air smelled fresh, like pine needles and wildflowers. Just as he leaned back in his chair, ready to soak it all in, he heard footsteps crunching on the gravel path leading to his cabin. He looked up to see a woman marching toward him, clipboard in hand and an expression on her face that could curdle milk. "Hi," Tom said cautiously, setting his mug down. "Can I help you?" The woman stopped a few feet away, glaring at him, as if he'd just committed some unforgivable crime. "Are you aware that your bird feeder is in violation of Section 3.2b of the HOA guidelines?" she demanded, pointing dramatically at the innocent feeder swaying gently in the breeze. Tom blinked, confused. Sorry, what?" "The Homeowners Association rules clearly state that no structures or additions can be attached to the exterior of any home without prior approval," she snapped, flipping through the pages on her clipboard. "That includes bird feeders." Tom stared at her for a moment, unsure whether to laugh or argue. Finally, he shook his head. "It's just a bird feeder. I don't think it's hurting anyone." "Well, that's not for you to decide," the woman retorted sharply. "I'm Karen Whitmore, head of the HOA, and unless you want fines piling up, I suggest you take it down immediately." Karen turned on her heel and marched off, leaving Tom staring after her with a mix of disbelief and amusement. He glanced at the bird feeder, then back at Karen's retreating figure. Something told him this wouldn't be the last time they crossed paths. Over the next few days, Tom tried to ignore Karen's visit. He figured she was just overly enthusiastic about her role in the HOA and would eventually move on to bother someone else. But he was wrong. On Monday, he found a note taped to his front door. Reminder: bird feeder must be removed ASAP. By Wednesday, another note appeared. Failure to comply will result in penalties. Each message grew more aggressive than the last, and Tom couldn't help but roll his eyes every time he read them. What really got under his skin, though, was how petty Karen's complaints were. One day, she accused him of mowing his lawn too early in the morning, even though he didn't have a lawnmower. Another time, she claimed his trash cans were improperly aligned along the curb, despite the fact that he rarely used them since he composted most of his waste. Every interaction left him feeling like he was being watched, judged, and criticized for things that didn't matter. Despite the growing tension, Tom refused to let Karen ruin his peace. He continued tinkering around the cabin, taking long walks by the lake and enjoying the solitude. But deep down, he knew Karen wasn't going to stop anytime soon. She seemed determined to make his life miserable, and he couldn't figure out why. One afternoon, while chopping firewood in the backyard, Tom spotted Karen peeking over the fence. She scribbled something furiously on her clipboard before disappearing again. He sighed, tossing the axe aside. Living here was supposed to be an escape from stress, not a battle zone. Still, he reminded himself that he wasn't about to back down. This was his home now, and he wasn't going to let anyone push him around, not even a nosy neighbor with a clipboard and a bad attitude. Little did Tom know, Karen's antics were about to escalate in ways he never imagined. But for now, he focused on keeping his cool and holding on to the tranquility he loved so much. After all, every storm has a calm before it, and Tom was determined to enjoy his while it lasted. As the days turned into weeks, Karen's behavior became more than just an annoyance. It started to feel like a full-blown campaign against Tom. At first, it was just the notes and random accusations about things that didn't even exist. But soon, she began recruiting other neighbors to join her crusade. She'd knock on doors, clipboard in hand, whispering exaggerated stories about how that guy at the cabin was breaking every rule in the book. Some of the neighbors listened politely but shrugged it off, while others nodded along, eager to side with anyone who seemed authoritative. Karen wasn't content with gossip alone, though. Her next move came during one of Tom's rare attempts to socialize. He had invited a few old friends over for a laid-back weekend barbecue. It wasn't anything fancy, just burgers, hot dogs, and some cold drinks. They laughed, shared stories, and enjoyed the crisp evening air by the lake. For the first time in ages, Tom felt like he was truly unwinding. The stress of dealing with Karen faded into the background as his buddies cracked jokes and played music softly in the background. But peace never lasts long when someone like Karen is involved. Just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, there she was marching across the yard like she owned the place. Tom spotted her before anyone else did, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her lips pressed into a thin line. He groaned inwardly, knowing exactly what was coming. "Turn that music down," she barked, pointing accusingly at the small Bluetooth speakers sitting on the picnic table. "You're disturbing the neighborhood." Tom blinked, glancing around. His friends exchanged confused looks, their laughter fading. The music wasn't loud enough to carry beyond the property, let alone bother anyone else. In fact, the only sounds louder than the tunes were the crickets chirping and the occasional splash of fish jumping in the lake. "It's barely audible," Tom replied calmly, stepping forward. "We're not bothering anyone." "That's not for you to decide," Karen shot back, her voice rising. "I've already had multiple complaints from neighbors. If you don't shut this party down right now, I'll have no choice but to call the authorities." The group fell silent, staring at her. One of Tom's friends leaned over and whispered, "Who is this lady?" Tom forced a tight smile. "This is Karen. She's very passionate about rules." Karen ignored the comment, tapping her foot impatiently. "Do I need to remind you again? This isn't your personal playground. You're part of a community, and you need to follow the guidelines." Tom clenched his jaw, trying to keep his temper in check. "We're following all the rules, Karen. There's no noise ordinance being broken here. And if anyone actually has a problem, they can come talk to me directly instead of sending you to do their dirty work." For a moment, Karen looked taken aback, as if she hadn't expected him to stand up to her. Then her expression hardened, and she jabbed a finger in his direction. "You think you're funny, don't you? Well, let me tell you something. You're not fooling anyone. People are watching you, and trust me, they won't tolerate your antics forever." With that, she spun around and stormed off, muttering under her breath. The mood of the evening shifted instantly. What had been a fun gathering turned awkward and tense. After a few minutes of uncomfortable silence, Tom's friends tried to lighten the mood by changing the subject, but the damage was done. The lake seemed quieter, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Later that night, after his friends had left and the fire pit had burned down to embers, Tom sat alone on the porch, replaying the confrontation in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't going to stop until she got what she wanted, and what she wanted was to drive him out of the neighborhood. But why? What had he ever done to deserve this kind of treatment? His thoughts were interrupted by the distant wail of sirens. At first he thought nothing of it. Surely it was unrelated. But then the flashing blue and red lights appeared on the edge of his property, casting eerie shadows through the trees. 2 police officers stepped out of their car and approached the cabin, their expressions unreadable. Tom stood up, his heart sinking. He already knew what this was about. "Are you Thomas Reynolds?" one of the officers asked, shining a flashlight toward him. "Yes," Tom replied, keeping his tone steady. "Is everything okay?" "We received a call from a concerned citizen, claiming there was excessive noise and potential threats made during a disturbance earlier tonight," the officer explained. "Can you tell us what happened?" Tom sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I had a few friends over for dinner and music. It wasn't loud and no threats were made. Someone must have called it in unnecessarily." The officers exchanged glances, clearly skeptical. "Mind if we take a look around?" one of them asked. "Go ahead," Tom said, gesturing toward the cabin. "There's nothing to hide." The search didn't take long. The officers found nothing out of the ordinary, no illegal activity, no weapons, no evidence to support Karen's claims. Still, they warned Tom to keep the noise down in the future and avoid upsetting the neighbors. As they drove away, Tom felt a mix of frustration and disbelief. How could someone twist such harmless activities into something criminal? He spent the rest of the night pacing the living room, replayed the events in his head. This wasn't just about a bird feeder or a barbecue anymore. Karen was escalating, using fear and authority to bully him into submission. And worst of all, she seemed untouchable. Who would believe him over her? She was the queen of the HOA, the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood's precious rules. To most people, she probably seemed reasonable, maybe even admirable. But Tom knew better. Beneath her polished exterior lay a relentless determination to control everything and everyone around her. Determined not to let Karen win, Tom decided to fight back, but not in the way she expected. Instead of arguing or retaliating, he started doing research. He dug into the history of the neighborhood, poring over old documents and records online. He wanted to understand how the HOA operated, who funded it, and whether there was any legal loophole he could use to protect himself. What he discovered shocked him. It turned out that the entire subdivision, the roads, the shared amenities, even the land beneath each house was technically owned by him. Decades ago, his uncle hadn't just built a cabin. He'd purchased the entire plot of land outright. When he sold parcels to individual buyers, he included strict covenants to ensure the area remained pristine. Over time, those covenants evolved into the HOA guidelines everyone followed today. Somehow, this crucial detail had been forgotten or perhaps deliberately overlooked by nearly everyone, including Karen. Armed with this knowledge, Tom realized he held significant power over the neighborhood. He could dismantle the HOA entirely. If he wanted to, he could impose new rules, revoke privileges, or even evict troublemakers. But that wasn't his style. Tom valued his privacy and preferred to avoid unnecessary drama. Still, he couldn't ignore Karen's relentless harassment forever. When she filed yet another baseless complaint about non-existent violations, Tom decided it was time to assert himself, not violently, but firmly. He scheduled a meeting with the HOA board, intending to present his findings and set boundaries once and for all. Little did Karen know, Her reign of terror was about to come crashing down. The HOA meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening, held in the community clubhouse, a small but tidy building with beige walls and mismatched furniture. It wasn't exactly a grand venue, but it served its purpose. Tom arrived early, clutching a folder filled with documents, maps, and legal papers that proved his ownership of the land. He felt a mix of nerves and determination as he took a seat at the back of the room, waiting for the others to arrive. Karen was already there, sitting front and center like she owned the place, ironically enough. She had her usual clipboard balanced on her lap, her pen poised as if ready to document every word spoken. A few other neighbors trickled in slowly, some looking curious, others bored. Most of them probably thought this was just another routine gathering to discuss things, like lawn maintenance or holiday decorations. They had no idea what was coming. When the meeting began, the atmosphere was casual at first. The chairperson, a mild-mannered older man named Bill, welcomed everyone and went over the agenda. Complaints about parking spaces, suggestions for improving the shared dock, and updates on upcoming events dominated the conversation. Karen chimed in frequently, her voice sharp and commanding, offering opinions on everything from flowerbed designs to speed limits on the neighborhood roads. Tom stayed quiet, biding his time. Finally, it was his turn to speak. Bill glanced down at the list of topics and said, "Next up, we have Tom Reynolds, who requested to address the board tonight." Tom stood up, gripping the folder tightly in one hand. All eyes turned to him, including Karen's. Her expression shifted slightly, curiosity mingling with suspicion. Clearly, she hadn't expected him to say much beyond apologizing for whatever imaginary offense she'd accused him of. "Lately, thanks for letting me share something important," Tom began, his voice steady despite the knot of tension in his stomach. "I know most of you are here because you care about keeping our neighborhood nice and peaceful. I do too, but before we dive deeper into rules and guidelines, I think it's crucial we clarify something fundamental." He paused, opening the folder and pulling out a stack of photocopies. He handed them to Bill, who passed them around the table. Murmurs rippled through the room as people flipped through the pages. Karen leaned forward, scanning the documents with growing unease. "These papers show that the land this entire subdivision sits on, including all the houses, roads, and shared amenities, technically belongs to me," Tom continued. "My late uncle purchased the property decades ago and sold parcels under specific covenants, designed to preserve the area's natural beauty. Over time, those covenants evolved into the HOA rules we follow today. Somehow, everyone seems to have forgotten or overlooked that I still own the underlying land." The room fell silent. Even Karen, usually so quick to argue or interrupt, sat frozen, her face pale. For once, she didn't have a snappy comeback. One of the neighbors cleared their throat. "Wait, does this mean you control everything? Like the roads and the clubhouse?" Tom nodded. "In a legal sense, yes. I'm not saying I want to change anything drastic or disrupt how things are run. I value my privacy and prefer to keep a low profile. But given recent events, I felt it was necessary to bring this to your attention." Karen finally found her voice. "This has to be fake," she blurted out, slamming her palm against the table. "There's no way you own all this land. You're lying." Tom raised an eyebrow. "Feel free to check the documents yourself, or better yet, consult a lawyer. Everything here is legit." Bill, who had been quietly reading through the paperwork, looked up. "These appear to be authentic," he admitted reluctantly. "If true, this changes a lot." Karen's face flushed red. Whether from anger or embarrassment, it was hard to tell. She shot to her feet, pointing a finger at Tom. "You can't just swoop in here and pull this kind of stunt. This is ridiculous. Everyone knows how these Neighborhoods work. You buy a house, you follow the rules. That's it. I'm not trying to cause trouble, Tom said calmly, though his patience was wearing thin. All I'm asking for is respect. If we can live peacefully without unnecessary drama, I won't interfere. But if someone continues to harass me or anyone else, I reserve the right to reconsider my approach. His words hung heavy in the air. The other neighbors exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to say. Some looked sympathetic, while others seemed more concerned about how this revelation might affect their own lives. Karen, however, refused to back down. "This isn't over," she hissed, gathering her things and storming out of the room. The door slammed shut behind her, leaving an awkward silence in her wake. After the meeting ended, Tom lingered for a bit, answering questions from curious neighbors. Many thanked him for handling the situation diplomatically, admitting they'd noticed Karen's behavior escalating recently but hadn't known how to address it. Others apologized for letting her antics go unchecked for so long. It was clear that while Karen had her supporters, plenty of people were relieved to see her power challenged. That night, as Tom drove back to his cabin, he felt a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. On one hand, he'd finally put Karen in her place, not through aggression, but by presenting undeniable facts. On the other hand, he knew this wasn't the end of the story. Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat easily, and she'd likely try to retaliate in some way. Still, for the first time in weeks, he felt like he had the upper hand. Back at the cabin, Tom poured himself a cup of coffee and settled onto the porch, listening to the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore. He thought about the meeting and how quickly the dynamics of the neighborhood had shifted. People who once avoided eye contact with him now greeted him warmly. Even Bill, the chairperson, had promised to review the HOA's operations to ensure fairness moving forward. But Karen's absence loomed large. She hadn't shown her face since storming out of the clubhouse, and Tom couldn't help but wonder what she was plotting next. Would she escalate further, or would she retreat quietly? Either way, he was prepared. With the truth on his side, he felt confident he could handle whatever came his way. For now, though, he allowed himself a moment of peace. The stars sparkled above, reflected faintly on the surface of the water. The cool breeze carried the scent of pine trees, and the world felt still and quiet again. Whatever battles lay ahead, Tom knew he'd done the right thing. And sometimes that was enough. The days following the HOA meeting felt like a strange mix of calm and tension. On one hand, Karen had vanished from sight, no more surprise visits to Tom's cabin, no more accusatory notes taped to his door. It was almost too good to be true. But on the other hand, her absence left an eerie void. The neighborhood didn't feel quite normal without her dramatic flair for conflict. People whispered about her behind closed doors, speculating whether she'd finally met her match or if this was just the calm before another storm. Tom tried not to dwell on it. He returned to his routine, spending mornings fixing up the cabin and afternoons fishing by the lake. Neighbors who once avoided him now waved hello as they passed by. Some even stopped to chat, thanking him for standing up to Karen. One elderly couple admitted they'd been afraid to speak out against her for years, worried about retaliation. "You've given us hope," the wife said with a warm smile. Tom nodded politely. Though he couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't done anything extraordinary, he'd simply told the truth. But while most neighbors seemed relieved, others remained uneasy. A few shot him wary glances, clearly unsure how to own someone who technically owned the ground beneath their homes. One man, a middle-aged guy with a thick beard and a pickup truck, approached Tom one afternoon while he was working in the yard. "Listen," the man began, shifting uncomfortably. "I don't mean to pry, but what are you planning to do with all this? You know, the land and everything?" Tom set down his gardening tools and wiped his hands on his jeans. "Nothing drastic," he replied honestly. "I'm not here to kick anyone out or change the way things work. I just want to live peacefully, same as everyone else." The man hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Just let us know if anything changes, all right?" "I will," Tom promised. But as the man walked away, Tom couldn't help but wonder how long it would take for rumors to spread. People were bound to start questioning his intentions, regardless of what he said. That was human nature. Fear of the unknown always led to speculation. Karen, meanwhile, wasn't taking the news lying down. Though she disappeared from public view, she was far from defeated. In fact, she was more determined than ever to reclaim control. She spent hours poring over legal documents, searching for loopholes or errors in Tom's claims. She called lawyers, sent angry emails to county officials, and even drafted petitions demanding a reevaluation of property ownership records. Her efforts were frantic and desperate, but ultimately futile. Every expert she consulted confirmed the same thing. Tom's paperwork was ironclad. Frustrated and humiliated, Karen retreated further into isolation. She stopped attending HOA meetings altogether, refusing to acknowledge Bill's attempts to reach out. Instead, she focused her energy on rallying support among her closest allies in the neighborhood. These were the people who shared her obsession with rules and order, the ones who believed Tom's revelation threatened the very foundation of their community. At first, Karen's campaign gained little traction. Most neighbors were tired of her antics and unwilling to pick sides in what they saw as a personal vendetta. But Karen was persistent. She hosted secret gatherings at her house, serving coffee and cookies while painting Tom as a threat to their way of life. "He thinks he's untouchable now," she warned dramatically. "What's stopping him from raising fees or evicting people? We can't let him get away with this." Her words struck a chord with a small but vocal group. They started spreading rumors, whispering about how Tom might impose new restrictions or sell parts of the land to developers. Fear began to creep back into the neighborhood, undoing some of the progress made after the meeting. One crisp Saturday morning, Tom noticed flyers taped to several mailboxes along the road. Curious, he pulled one off and read it, **, emergency community meeting. Protect our homes. **, the flyer urged residents to attend a special gathering at Karen's house later that day. It promised discussions about recent developments and the future of our neighborhood. There was no mention of Tom by name, but it didn't take a genius to figure out who they were talking about. Tom debated skipping the event altogether. After all, he'd already proven his point at the official HOA meeting. Why waste time engaging with Karen's fear-mongering? But something told him ignoring the situation wouldn't make it go away. If anything, it might give her more ammunition to twist the narrative in her favor. So, reluctantly, he decided to show up. When he arrived at Karen's house that evening, he found a modest crowd gathered in her backyard. Chairs were arranged in a circle, and a whiteboard stood propped against the fence, covered in hastily scrawled notes. Karen greeted him with a tight-lipped smile. "Clearly surprised to see him there. I didn't expect you to join us," she said coolly, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "I figured it was better to hear your concerns directly," Tom replied, evenly, rather than letting rumors run wild. Karen's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Instead, she gestured for him to take a seat. As the meeting began, she launched into a rehearsed speech about transparency and community values. She accused Tom of hiding his ownership for selfish reasons and demanded he provide a clear plan for managing the land. Tom listened patiently, letting her rant until she ran out of steam. Then he stood up, addressing the group. "Look, I understand. Why some of you might feel uneasy. Change is never easy, especially when it challenges what you thought you knew. But I'm not here to hurt anyone. I've lived quietly in my cabin for months, minding my own business. All I ask is that you extend me the same courtesy." He paused, scanning the faces around him. Some looked skeptical, others thoughtful. "If you have legitimate concerns, bring them to me directly. Don't let fear dictate your actions. And don't let anyone, including Karen, convince you that I'm the enemy." His words seemed to strike a nerve. A few neighbors nodded in agreement, while others exchanged uncertain glances. Karen, however, wasn't ready to concede defeat. She jumped in, trying to steer the conversation back to her grievances, but her arguments fell flat. Without solid evidence to back her claims, her accusations sounded hollowed out. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that Karen's influence was waning. Many attendees left with a renewed sense of perspective, realizing that Tom posed no real threat. Others remained undecided but promised to keep an open mind. Only a handful stayed loyal to Karen, vowing to continue fighting against him. As Tom walked home under the starlit sky, he felt a flicker of hope. The battle wasn't over, not completely, but he'd planted seeds of trust and understanding in the neighborhood. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to believe that peace might actually be within reach. The next morning, Tom woke up to find a handwritten note tucked under his door. It was short and simple. Asterisk, thank you for being honest. Where? Glad you're part of this community. Asterisk, no signature, just those few lines. Tom smiled faintly, tucking the note into his pocket. Maybe, just maybe, things were starting to turn around. Weeks turned into months, and the neighborhood began to settle into a new rhythm. The initial shock of Tom's revelation had worn off, replaced by a cautious sense of normalcy. Karen, however, couldn't adapt. Her attempts to rally support fizzled out as more neighbors warmed up to Tom. Some even admitted they were relieved to see her influence wane. Without her constant complaints and accusations, life in the Lakeside community felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted. Tom noticed the change in small ways. People greeted him warmly when he passed by. Kids riding their bikes waved at him from the road. One neighbor even dropped off a plate of homemade cookies with a note that read, "Thanks for keeping things calm." It wasn't perfect. There were still whispers and lingering doubts, but it was progress. And for Tom, that was enough. Karen, meanwhile, became increasingly isolated. She stopped hosting secret meetings and avoided public gatherings altogether. When she did venture outside, she kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone who might try to engage her in conversation. Her once imposing presence now seemed diminished, almost fragile. It was clear she hadn't anticipated losing so much ground. One chilly autumn morning, Tom spotted a for sale sign planted squarely in Karen's front yard. At first, he thought it might be a prank or maybe just wishful thinking on his part. But as days passed, the sign remained, and real estate agents started showing up at her house. Word spread quickly among the neighbors. Karen was moving out. The news came as both a relief and a surprise. While everyone knew she'd struggled to regain control after the HOA meeting, no one expected her to leave entirely. Speculation ran rampant. Some believed she decided to cut her losses and start fresh elsewhere. Others whispered that she simply couldn't bear the humiliation of being bested by the very man she'd tried so hard to drive away. Whatever the reason, her departure marked a turning point for the neighborhood. When the moving truck finally arrived, Karen kept to herself, loading boxes with quiet determination. She didn't say goodbye to anyone, not even the few loyal supporters who'd stuck by her side until the end. As the truck pulled away, leaving behind an empty driveway and a freshly painted sold sign, the neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief. With Curran gone, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Neighbors who had once tiptoed around her rules began loosening up. Lawn decorations reappeared in yards, music drifted through open windows, and laughter echoed across the lake during weekend barbecues. Even the HOA meetings felt less formal and more collaborative. Bill, the chairperson, joked that attendance had doubled since Karen's exit. "Guess people like meetings better when they're not afraid of getting yelled at," he quipped during one session, earning chuckles from the group. Tom attended these meetings occasionally, offering input when needed but mostly staying in the background. He made it clear he had no intention of micromanaging the neighborhood or disrupting its harmony. His only request was mutual respect, a principle most residents were happy to embrace. Over time, the fear and resentment that had defined the early days of his arrival faded, replaced by a growing sense of camaraderie. Still, Tom never forgot the lessons he'd learned. Owning the land gave him power, but wielding it responsibly taught him something far more valuable: the importance of balance. Rules existed for a reason, to maintain order and protect shared spaces, but rigid enforcement often did more harm than good. By choosing diplomacy over dominance, Tom had earned not just compliance but trust. Life at the cabin returned to the peaceful routine Tom had always dreamed of. He spent mornings tinkering with repairs, afternoons fishing by the lake, and evenings stargazing from his porch. The bird feeder Karen had once condemned remained proudly perched outside his door, a silent reminder of where it all began. Occasionally, curious neighbors would stop by to chat, sharing stories or asking questions about the land's history. Tom welcomed the connection, finding joy in being part of a community rather than apart from it. One evening, as golden sunlight filtered through the trees, Tom sat on his porch with a cup of coffee in hand. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine needles and wood smoke, mingling with the distant hum of crickets. Across the lake, children laughed as they skipped stones along the water's edge. For the first time in what felt like forever, everything felt right. He thought about Karen then, not with anger or bitterness, but with a sense of understanding. She had been driven by fear, convinced that chaos would erupt if she didn't enforce strict control. In her own misguided way, she had cared about the neighborhood, but her methods had alienated her from the very people she sought to protect. Tom hoped she'd find happiness wherever she went, free from the pressures that had consumed her here. As night fell and the stars emerged, twinkling like tiny lanterns against the velvet sky, Tom reflected on how far he'd come. What had started as a dream of solitude had evolved into something richer, a place where he belonged. The cabin wasn't just a retreat anymore, it was home. And the neighborhood, once a battleground, had become a community. In the end, Tom realized peace wasn't about winning or losing. It was about finding common ground, even with those who seemed impossible to understand. Sometimes, all it took was honesty, patience, and a willingness to listen. And sometimes, those simple acts could transform not just a place, but the people within it. Underneath the vast, star-filled sky, Tom smiled. Life was good.